Gilreath. Today we're going to be talking about the trauma-informed church. I'm so excited to be here today to talk about how we can be more trauma-informed in our churches. I am a nursing professor at Indiana Wesleyan University, as well as a nurse practitioner that practices in the area. Right now we are living in times full of trauma, racial injustice, a pandemic, a heated election. I am hopeful that this presentation will provide an overview of the role of the church in trauma. The objectives today, we're going to learn to realize the impact of trauma. We are going to learn to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma. We're going to learn to respond in faith-based ways, and we're going to learn strategies to resist re-traumatization. What is trauma? That's the question, right? Trauma results from an event, a series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening. And this has a lasting effect on the person's emotional, mental, physical, social, or spiritual well-being. That's the official definition of trauma. Another definition is any pain that keeps you from moving forward. That could be considered a trauma. We all can experience trauma. Trauma can be witnessing violence, experiencing abuse, living through a divorce, living through a traumatic event like a pandemic, the death of a loved one. Trauma can be the result of an unmet need. When we needed to be cared for, yet no one stepped in and helped us, that can be traumatizing. Church leadership also experiences trauma, and we will talk a little bit more about that later too. Trauma-informed care is a model of care that helps us understand how to help and heal trauma. And the 4 R's of trauma-informed care are realize, realizing the impact of trauma, recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma in clients, families, our church members, respond by integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, and practices, and then resisting re-traumatization. We do not want to cause more trauma in people with a trauma history. The early studies on trauma actually were looking at adverse childhood events in children, and they found that the more traumatic events a person experienced in childhood, it had lasting effects on their health. People who had traumatic events are 15 times more likely to attempt suicide, 4 times more likely to be an alcoholic, 4 times more likely to inject drugs, 3 times more likely to be on an antidepressant medication, 4 times more likely to suffer stroke, heart attack, or COPD, 3 times more likely to be diabetic, 2 times more likely to have a serious financial problem. As we can see, trauma has an impact on health in just about everyone. When we realize, too, about trauma and what it is, the main thing that we need to think about is that there's a mind shift. We need to shift from saying, what is wrong with you, to what happened to you. And this is hard. Viewing people through this lens, though, will set them up for empathy and a willingness to listen. It fosters an I am on your team sentiment instead of an adversarial one, where we're just, kind of throwing them out there and not giving them the supports that they need. So if you don't take anything else from this presentation today, this is what I would like you to go home thinking about. Instead of thinking about people when they come to you with help, what is wrong with you? Think about through the lens of what has happened to you. And you'll see, it will just change your whole mindset and thinking. We also need to realize that trauma lasts. Trauma does not disappear. Trauma can leave scars. And we can learn to manage it, but it is always with us. Much of trauma we have experienced does not go away. We can carry it with us, but we cannot expect others to carry it for us. And that's an important part when we as church leadership, we need to learn not to take on other people's baggage and traumas. We can help them, but we don't need to turn it into our own. And that's part of good trauma-informed care. We need to recognize the signs of trauma. What does trauma look like in people in faith-based settings? Trauma responses are as vast as personalities are of the people. This is just a few as an example, and note that these behaviors, they may not have to do with trauma. If a person has a pattern of behavior, though, I would consider talking to them privately. Maybe say, hey, you know what? I noticed that it's really hard for you to participate in communion. Is this a triggering event for you? What can I do to help you? And the other thing that is helpful is to look for the people who need a lot of pastoral care. Look for the people who are difficult. Look for the people who have a hard time with trust. There could be a trauma history there, and that would be an opportunity for us to help. And also look for the people that you know that are experiencing trauma, such as people going through a divorce, job loss, death of a loved one. We know that those are traumatic events. The next slide contains answers to the question, what does trauma look like in children? And this is just a kind of a word cloud slide, and as you can see, this is behaviors that children exhibit when going through trauma or have had trauma or even have a history of trauma. The bigger the word, the more responses that specific word has. And a lot of these responses, we see them in adults too, don't we? Control, anxiety, sleeplessness, fear, self-harm, hypervigilance is on there, fight, flight, shut down. So these are also the things we can look for that our loved ones in our church may be experiencing, and this is how trauma may manifest in them. Trauma and faith are linked, and faith is one of the most, if not the most, important healing tool for trauma. The question is, how do people whose hearts and minds who have been wounded come to feel and know the redeeming power of God's grace? Right? Sometimes it's hard to understand the love of God when you are in crisis. But Jesus knows trauma. Jesus suffered a violent, traumatic death. This shows solidarity with trauma victims, particularly of unspeakable violence. Trauma is also the most central event of our faith. Christ on the cross. This is horrendous and redemptive, worst and best. Simultaneous, traumatic, violent, and redemptive love in the same instant. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. Grace, the grace of God, is strong enough to hold it all. Every broken, trauma-ridden soul, love comes through grace. This can also be why some things at church are very triggering to people who with a trauma background. Reliving Christ's trauma through certain songs, communion, holidays, it could cause a re-traumatization response in some people, so we need to be aware of that. This is one of my favorite hymns, Come You Disconsolate, and this arrangement is by Daniel Rafe at our church. And disconsolate means one without comfort, and I feel like this sums up the goal of what we want the church to do in our trauma victims. We want a place where those without comfort can bring their hurts, their sorrows, and find healing in our faith community. So how do we do that? That's what we're going to talk about next, and that's the bulk of the presentation. How can we as the church help people who have a trauma background? This is what we know about responding to trauma, that faith is a powerful healing tool in trauma. Trauma survivors, they need support, and positive coping mechanisms and resilient strategies are important. A lot of the risk factors that we saw earlier about the drug use and abuse, the alcoholism, those are all maladaptive coping strategies. So we need to figure out how to replace the maladaptive coping with positive coping strategies, and in our faith-based communities, we are primed to do this. How the church can respond. I'm going to go into each of these in more detail. Prayer. We can listen to the needs. We can learn to hold space. We can work toward understanding, and we can involve trauma survivors in the decision-making processes. Prayer. Prayer is very important. We pray for those affected by trauma. We pray for ourselves to be able to respond in love and to embrace trauma. But please be careful that prayer is not used as a brush off. Prayer is most effective when it is used in conjunction with other strategies. We don't want a thoughts and prayers people without doing anything else, because that feels like we're kind of othering them. We're not willing to go the extra mile and help them, which I don't think any of us want to do. We want to help those in need. Listen to the needs. The important thing about this is to ask and follow through. We need to create a safe space in corporate worship. And this is essential. People who do not feel safe have a much harder time participating and doing things in corporate worship with us. So we can just ask them, how do you feel safe? What can we do to help you feel safe? What do you need to be able to participate with us? Because we find you worthy. We want you to participate with us. Actively listen, but then also follow through. Maybe a certain song or hymn is triggering and they need a heads up. You can email them earlier in the week. Hey, we're singing, this song on Sunday. We just want to let you know, as we know this one is hard for you. Maybe they love communion, but at the same time, it causes unwanted emotions sometimes. Maybe they need to do communion in private. Maybe they need a buddy to go through communion with them and kind of walk them through it and hold their hand. There are all kinds of ways that we can follow through once we know their needs, but we have to know the needs first. Hold space. This is one of the most important ways that we can support trauma survivors. This is walking the road with them. In the Jewish tradition, it is sitting Shiva, allowing those in acute trauma or crisis to step back and allow ample time for healing. This is a way to show that we care and that we're willing to come alongside them. I had a friend whose faith actually returned because her congregation held space for her. She turned away from her faith when she was in her 20s, and then in her 40s, her father died. And she's Jewish, and in the Jewish tradition, they sit Shiva for a year. And her dad's congregation, they held space for her. They were there for her. They surrounded her. And during that year, her faith blossomed and grew and became renewed. It was such an amazing thing to watch as her faith reemerged over that year. And this also goes back to I feel like we, in a lot of church bodies, we ask people to come back to their regular duties and volunteering maybe a little bit too soon. And this is a way where we can honor their grief, walk with them, and give them time for healing. I love the Jewish tradition where they do not allow anyone to serve in the church for a year and a day after a traumatic event. They hold space, they sit Shiva, they take care, they bring them in, they don't ignore them, but yet they don't allow them to work in the church until their healing has made a lot of progress. I feel like too, if we are truly holding space for people and walking with them through their traumatic events, we will know when they're ready to get re-involved in their normal volunteering or leadership type of activities. We'll know. We also need to work toward understanding. We can do this through actively listening, not blaming, and also one trick that I have learned is listen 3 to 4 times as much as you speak. This can be very hard, especially for me, because I always want to jump in with the helping part, but I have learned that I need to sit back and really listen to understand. A lot of times people who have a traumatic past, they feel like they're not understood. This is one way where we can do better at this. We need to respond by involving trauma survivors. We need to involve them in new policies and procedures, maybe in brainstorming sessions if we want to do better at trauma care, and in planning events, particularly related to vulnerable people. People with a trauma history, they may not want to share their individual stories, which is okay, but they will be able to give us insight into what may be difficult for others. Trauma survivors can help identify possible triggers that maybe we're not thinking of. Involvement in decisions is also a way to say you have worth in our church. We value you and your input. We also need to resist re-traumatization. Give a heads up to those with known triggers. Like I mentioned, maybe giving a heads up about a specific hymn if you know that that's a trigger. We also need to provide resources and support, but we do not also want to just simply pass them on to someone else. Follow up, stay involved. Make sure they know that your church body cares, even if they do need something like outside counseling or those kinds of resources. Be aware of traumaversaries. What is a traumaversary? A traumaversary is when a person experiences a traumatic event, their body will remember, and like clockwork, every year-ish around that time, they will start having these feelings. And a lot of times they don't even know why. They'll have feelings of anxiety or depression, and then it'll hit them that this is when that traumatic event happened. If we know that these happen in our loved ones in our congregations, it's okay to send a little card saying, hey, I'm thinking of you. I realize this may be a hard time for you this time of year. And I think we could do better at that too. We also need to be aware of our own reactions. We do a lot of work with a lot of hurting people, and we need to be sure not to take on their burdens and take care of ourselves. Particularly if you are an empath, self-care and self-awareness are key. Spending time in other people's traumas can take a toll on ourselves. This is why holding space is important. We can walk with people, but we cannot carry their load. We do want to support them without causing trauma in ourselves, if that makes sense. It's very hard to do. In summary, we talked about the 4 R's. We talked about realizing the impact of trauma and the mind shift of what happened to you instead of what is wrong with you. We want to get to that what happened to you piece of it. We recognize the signs of trauma, particularly in our church bodies. We discussed ways to respond as the church and how we can help people with a trauma history. And we discussed ways to resist re-traumatization, our own brothers and sisters, and especially ourselves. I also wanted to say I'm very interested in trauma-informed care and churches. If you want more information, if you want to sit down and talk, if you want to come up with a plan on how to do this better in your church, please contact me and we'll send all this out. Make sure that you have my email off after also. I would love to help. And then the references for this slide. There's a really good book by Jones, Serena Jones. It's called Trauma and Grace. This book was amazing. I have read it actually several times. It's getting a little dog-eared if you wanted something to read. And also the 4 R's and the model of trauma-informed care that comes from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. They have a great website and they also have great resources. If you also want other resources, just email me and I can find something that will work for your congregation. Thank you. Hello all, I'm Kathy Gilreath. I work here at Indiana Wesleyan and I am one of the nursing faculty. I've had an interest in trauma-informed care and how we as church members and church people can do better at trauma-informed care. With me today I have 2 of our peer support counselors who are willing to answer some questions, and they're going to introduce themselves.
My name is John Humphreys. I'm a peer support specialist with the CORE program in Grant Blackford Mental Health, MGH.
I'm Brian Blevins. I'm also a peer support specialist. I work with John and inside of our community.
So let's get started with the questions. The first question today is, what have you seen churches do well with people in crisis or undergoing a trauma situation?
Well, for me, there's several churches within our community that either do celebrate recovery or they have functions for the recovery community. So I see churches coming together somewhat, but I think the need is greater and that we could do a better job of just coming together and seeing what the needs are within the community and how we could better assist those that are struggling.
How about you, John?
We have some churches that actually offer Christian faith-based counseling, so that's one thing that they have done really well. I think some churches are getting around to where they'll donate food or finances or a building. So that is some of the stuff that I've seen churches do well in Grant County.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So now this is the hard question, and I really want you guys to be honest because I feel like anyone interested in this topic, we want honest answers to this one, okay? What can we, churches, do better?
Well, I think one thing that we could do better is have a better understanding, and I think unity across all lines, whether you're non-denominational, Presbyterian, Wesleyan, a unified effort. And one of the things I think in this community, being a smaller community, it's always we both have little services that we run. His is in Hartford City on Sunday, and mine's in Marion on Friday nights. People want to know, oh, what church are you representing and who's leading, instead of just it being a kingdom thing and us getting together. But I think you have to understand your lane as a church. Some congregations are different ages. Some congregations we need to just get back to discipling people in some of the traditional teachings of Jesus and disciple people. Some churches, that may not be an option, and they can help financially or they can help prepare meals, but really just getting back to caring and the message of Christ, which is make disciples and take these people on. And sometimes, some of us just don't want to. Sometimes we just want to throw the money at the problem and don't want to throw our time. And I think in my experience, the money helps, and we definitely need donations, so don't get me wrong, but what has helped me is pastors taking time out of their life and out of their schedule to answer my phone calls, and people more mature in their faith reaching out and helping guide me through life decisions and things like that, and not using the excuse of, well, I've never dealt with addiction, so I can't help with addiction. But my main mentor, I don't think he's ever really even drank alcohol. So I think the discipling thing, financing, and being willing to be in unity with other churches is one.
Right.
I think that's what we could do better.
We are all brothers and sisters. We should combat this together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that, some church members in congregations, if someone doesn't struggle with a certain thing, they just might have a lack of understanding, or everyone deals with addiction throughout families, our churches, our communities. So I think just awareness, better communication, and how is it that you can help somebody who is struggling. And to be honest, when I first got into recovery 5 years ago, the only people I really wanted to surround myself with was those in recovery and like-minded people. So when the church opened their doors and they accepted me in, I was exposed to a whole new family. So it just wasn't, people that were trying to get clean and stay clean. There was more wisdom and more guidance that I could go to, other than somebody that was struggling with addiction.
Right. And I think that seems to be a good point, is that we as the church, we can provide some of this other support services even if we don't have experience in recovery ourselves. Like John was saying, spiritual mentors is an important piece to this too. The third question is, how can we hold space and walk together effectively? And I think you guys touched on this a bit with the unity, and I wanted to hear more about that. Like, yeah, how can we walk with people going through recovery? What can the church do?
Well, I mean, we have recovery events, minus the COVID stuff that is going on now. Normally we have recovery events, we have walks, we have Voices of Recovery, we do praise and worship events often. So it's really just being aware and communicating when we have these events, and just asking how you can be a participant, or how you can help out in the events that we already have. And maybe a congregation wants to open up their doors to a game night or a family night or a certain function. We're always open to other churches opening up their doors as well.
I would say just come walk alongside us.
Absolutely.
I think come get the experience. We have, this might be a shameless plug, but on Friday nights we have a ministry that we're doing that has worship, and we have a testimony, and we serve meals, and we're kind of having to beg for meals right now. If it wasn't for the mission, you post stuff, but nobody responds, and he does this in Hartford City on Sunday night, their Hope House meetings. And we have we've had up to 200 people show up, and it's a recovery event. And the one thing that is beautiful about it is we have 10 different churches represented at some of these events, and to watch everybody start to mingle. But I would say come find out what we're doing and just come walk alongside us, whether you're called to do it or not. There's so many different ways to help and walk beside us in this. And sometimes it may be as simple as prayer. some churches having their intercessors get together and say, we're going to pray for these people that are on the front lines of this addiction epidemic, and we're going to pray for them, which at the end of the day is the most important thing, the most valuable thing you could do for the people in recovery, their families, and the people that are fighting for those people.
Thank you. What are your tips to help us not take on another person's trauma? I think a lot of people in church leadership, they get to the point where they want to help so much, it's hard for them to not carry all the burden themselves, if that makes sense. Like, what are your self-care tips? Because you're in the trenches.
Time with
Is it
God.
hard? Time with God, that's a good one.
If you're not spending time with the Lord, it's going to show. It's going to show in your recovery. It's going to show in your family. It's going to show in your job. So, being in your word, time in prayer and time in worship, and having spiritual mothers and fathers to speak into your life, and just to help be that light when you're struggling, because it's easy to take on people's stuff.
Right.
And when we go home, it doesn't stop.
Right.
So sometimes we go home and it'll run over to the next day, and the next day can run over into the next day. So we have to turn our cell phones off. We have to, there's some things that we have to do because we can take on other people's things, but I think we communicate very well. So to share with one another, to have cell groups, to have other leadership groups where leaders get together. You can't pour out of an empty cup, so you have to make sure that you're plugged in and you're being filled up spiritually, because you just can't be running around saving people's lives. Only Christ can save lives, and with what we do, you can take on other people's stress and pain and feelings. So leaning on one another, having those spiritual mentors in our lives, that's everything.
I think Jesus poured out, he rested, he poured out, he rested. So you have to rest. Unfortunately, in the recovery community, you're not going to be able to not take on people's trauma. So if you're not willing to do that to an extent, just donate money.
Right.
But also, Jesus didn't save people that didn't want to be saved, and he didn't heal people that didn't want to be healed. So you have to use your discernment of, just because somebody has a problem doesn't necessarily mean that that is my problem and that they want help with that problem. So we have a lot of family members and stuff that will reach out to us and want us to be like bounty hunters and go save them.
Right.
And you will grow really weary in trying to take all that on if the people aren't even reaching out to you, because it's not, you can't force change on people. And Jesus, he didn't even do that. So I think that pouring out and making sure you're resting. But the unfortunate thing is, once you take somebody on, you have to be available at 3 o'clock in the morning if they have a relapse and they're at the trap house. You got to pick them up. So balancing it in this world is a lot trickier than probably a lot of other ministry areas where you can say, at 9 o'clock I'm turning on the Golden Girls and calling it a night.
Right, that's a good point.
And one more thing, know your resources.
Oh,
Know what resources are available and who you can call and when's a good time to call. So just figure out what the resources are in your community and have those ready.
Mm-hmm. That is a great point. How can churches communicate, like, to you guys and to other people in the community, that they're willing to take this journey more seriously? They are willing, maybe to get more involved. How would they communicate? Email,
Telephone.
phone? Yeah, okay.
Email,
Facebook?
show
Okay.
up, Facebook.
Yes.
We're all over Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
Our emails are out there. The core number is on some billboards and at Marion General Hospital. So there's lots of places where we can be contacted and help plug you in. If you don't know, it's very easy to get on Facebook and look up the core page, or John Humphreys or Brian Blevins, a few other ones on Facebook. So just reach out, and it just starts by picking up your phone.
Let us come talk to your
Yeah.
people and see if you're congregating. Like we have a nice little message of challenging. We have good testimonies, but also challenging where a congregation's heart's at, not in a mean way, but where it could land. So reach out to us and see, or show up to one of our things. I think a lot of times we have church leadership get a hold of us and they want to take time, meet. What can I do? I want to start a group. Well, that's not what we need. We need resources we kind of need streams going into the bodies of water that we already have. So, but we can, if your church is showing you interest, or you're trying to see if they would have an interest, we have a team of 4 people, 5, 6, 7 people. If somebody can come reach out to one of us and we can just come tell our testimonies about what God did in our lives, and maybe invoke some passion and hope into people, and also just explain what it is we do have going on, and kind of let your congregation decide. Is there a group of people that like to cook? They could help us with that. Is there a group of people that, love social media and would like to help us with that? There's all kinds of ways to help. But that's one thing you can do, or just show up to the stuff we're doing without the big VIP trumpets. Just show up, sit in, and see. See what you think and see where your heart's at with it. Every church churches are called to different things, so it's okay to come check it out and be like, this isn't us, but we'll support you in prayer.
Great. And then I just have one last question. It's not really a question. You guys are starting kind of a new initiative, the Church is Embracing Offenders, and I really would like to know a little bit more information about that, because I feel like that's a way that you guys are going to have a need for churches might step in and help, right?
Yes, we do have a need.
Yes.
Getting it. It's been around for a while, but it's again in an infancy stage with the quarantine and stuff. We're just gonna be rebooting it, but we basically try to connect guys that are, right now it's guys. We try to connect guys coming out of jail to a church and a recovery group, and mentors. So there's a sacrifice. There is a touch of sacrifice on the church's behalf to set up 2 to 3 mentors per person that we have coming out. And basically, I would start. So once this quarantine's lifted, I would start meeting with them about 90 days before they get out of jail. Figure out what their background is, what kind of a church they were raised in. Do they have a family church that they're already comfortable at, and try to get them placed with the right church for them. And then let the church kind of take on the mentoring and all of that stuff, and they can just check back with us. So it's a pretty cool thing, and churches can get involved. You just have to have the people willing to mentor. And I'm hoping we can get maybe Jamie or somebody to take up to start with a CEO for the women's part of the jail. So. And Brian he's done a lot with the CEO program too, so he can probably shed some light on it now if he would like to.
Yeah, just like John said, it's about getting people plugged in and mentored, and people to walk beside people. So we have the Hope House for men, we have the Hope House for women, we have the Grace House, and we have the Life Change program at the Grant County Rescue Mission, and the Women's Open Heart. So if you're looking for where you go to maybe support someone in recovery, stop and mentor someone. Meet a need of someone in recovery. Offer to take someone to your local church. And it's just showing up and being present and asking, that leadership, what's the needs of those that are struggling, and how can we come and meet those needs. So when the whole community steps up, with how many churches that we have in the community, if a church would just take on one person,
Right.
Just absolutely just one person. If every single church would sponsor one person, the outcome would be amazing. And that's just one.
Yeah. Right. Great. Do you guys even have any other thoughts or anything else to add?
I just want to encourage everybody. Like, there are people on the ground fighting this battle in our community, but also I want you to, since I have this chance, we have people that can help you get your congregation or people that their loved ones into rehab. The Life Change program he was talking about is something that you should definitely look into. We can actually get transports to rehab. Don't even have to worry about the finances because the rehab will start to look into the insurances. There are transitional houses. There's recovery groups going on a regular basis. Whether you want to be anonymous or you want to go worship and hear what God's doing in other people's lives, we have those things available. So it's not as hopeless as it used to be. Things have changed. We have transitional houses. The Hope houses are doing amazing. We have the Grace House, and there's just more of those opening up. So a lot of times you think that you have to run and try to figure all this stuff out, but we actually have contacts. That Brian is a professional at dealing with rehabilitation centers and insurances and things like that to get people, and all that takes is a phone call instead of running around trying to figure that stuff out. So there are resources, and I would just ask that we all, the people that are watching this, remember that we are under one kingdom, and we are a complete body, and it takes all of us. So like we need everybody, in prayer, whatever. But we are one body. We don't care about denomination over here. Jesus, we believe in Jesus, that He was resurrected, and He still heals. And I just want to let you know that there are resources and all those things that we used to have to fight so hard to do and figure out and everything like that. You have people in places now that can get that stuff set up in a matter of, how long does it take you?
2 days.
2 days. 2 days he'll have somebody off to treatment. And then also planning with them what their next move is, and
The supports after.
the supports after, mentors, sponsors, meetings, all of that stuff. So we have a really good operation now if people are willing to use it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It seems like we as the church, we have a huge opportunity to come together as brothers and sisters to help in this very serious crisis. If you have any other questions, our contact information I'm sure will be sent out along with the video links. So just let us know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.